Remote work, remote teams, and of course, remote conflict. We all know what the usual situation is. People sit together and then you try to figure out what the conflict is, how to resolve it. And normally when you sit together as reasonable human beings, you are able to figure out a solution for any conflict. Also, we all know that it's always easier or often easier to sit down together to resolve the conflict. However, we all know that we are facing a new normal and a world where remote work will become common. And of course, that has an influence on the conflict culture we have. And we have an expert here today to talk about this. Hello and welcome, Jane Gunn.
Hello, Niels.
Thank you very much for taking the time. So you're an international mediator, author, and keynote speaker. I saw you speak at many different conferences. When we now face the new normal, where let's say at least 1/3 potentially will stay at home, and we have conflicts, maybe even conflicts between people who only know each other from a Microsoft Teams or Zoom meeting window, what is the impact that this will have when it comes to resolving conflict in an organization or even with clients?
It is already a real challenge, Niels, and I'm seeing this with some of my corporate clients already. It starts, I suppose, with the expectation when they are meeting. You talk about some people not having met each other than on Zoom. And some of the team meetings, my clients have told me, are very functional. They don't include much sort of social interaction. And so people are not building up that initial level of know, like, and trust, of trusting another person as a human being. They're just seeing them as a sort of functional member of the team. So that's one of the levels at which you start to build tension. I mean, conflict arises initially from tension and then goes through this phase of, there's a conflict and then it becomes a dispute if we don't resolve it. So that's one of the initial stages, is the meeting people and getting to trust people, I think.
So how do we create trust? Because we need trust to trust a conflict solution, a conflict resolution as well. How do I create trust when I only see people on a computer screen?
I think you've just got to take the time to get to know people. And, in particular, when there is already some tension or conflict, you've got to have the time and the space to understand that person and, in particular, their perspective, their needs and interests on something in a deeper way. And I think it's those sort of more challenging conversations that we're just not having at the moment, where we get to understand what drives and motivates that person, and where do we have some common ground, and what's our focus for moving forward. Those are the things we're not having so effectively, I guess.
And another issue, maybe it's just me, but let's say I'm working from home and I know how important the factor of the network is in the UK. So let's say I work from home and then there will be a decision made about, let's say, promotions or who gets the next attractive project. Don't you think that the remote working world could have an impact on these factors? Because when I'm not present and not physically there, suddenly someone else gets promoted. That is probably a very easy reason and a very obvious reason to create conflict, isn't it?
It's certainly going to be the catalyst for some conflict, some unhappiness, because, as human beings, we often, we like to congregate. I mean, I've certainly, landed into projects simply by being in the right place at the right time, having met the right person at the right time. So you're right, Niels. I think there are going to be opportunities that are maybe lost. And I think for organizations, one of the things that I go back to, and we've talked a little bit about this before, is decision making. I think they've got to be very clear now about their values and then their criteria when they're making a decision, and make sure that they put those two things at the heart of decisions, even if that decision is, should I include someone on this project team or not? And, does the criteria include the fact that they have been physically present or not physically present? I mean, you've got to be very clear about these things, because if you're not clear, then there's room for misunderstanding and unhappiness and conflict and so on.
When we now talk about a situation, let's say we have a certain client and we disagree with that client in a certain project and the conflict escalates. You are a fully qualified lawyer, and you know that especially when people want to be very sure on the legal side of the game, there will be a moment where either the compliance department or the legal department says, let's just pass it on to the lawyers and take it from there. I know that you are in favor of mediation. So how can I prevent that companies, just because we don't have an opportunity to meet and we only see each other online, that they go down the road of we just sue each other left, right, and center?
So again, it comes back to having, clear values and criteria about how do we resolve conflict and disputes in an organization. And then, or even everybody is accountable for resolving any conflict or dispute that arises in their department, even if that's an external conflict with a client, for example. They know that their obligation is to try and resolve that early and easily.
True. Yeah.
Let's have a face-to-face meeting. Maybe this is a good opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting. If we need to call in a mediator, let's call in a mediator. But there's sort of an understanding and even an obligation that will happen.
Do you think that mediation can happen completely online? So, for example, could someone book you to say, we have that person we only know from the online world. They only know us from the online world. So can we get you in online as well?
Absolutely, Niels. And one of my first mediations since we went into lockdown last year was working with a French company. I haven't met any of the people I mediated with. They haven't met me. So a lot of my work now is working online. And I have to say, it surprised me how effective it is to mediate online for various different reasons.
Which reasons do you think are the most important ones why it is so efficient to do it online?
Well, some of the reasons why we choose to work remotely anyway, you're cutting down travel time and so on. But the other thing is, one of the things that people feel when they go into a legal meeting or a legal process is they feel a lot of stress, a heightened anxiety. And therefore, they're perhaps not behaving as well as they might, or they're not managing the dialogue in the mediation as well as they might if they weren't stressed. So coming into an online meeting means that they feel a higher degree of control. They haven't had to dress up. They haven't had to go somewhere that's different. And they may even be sitting at home with their own favorite coffee mug, for example. And so that side of things, the reducing the stress, can work just as effectively as if we were meeting in person.
So when people now for the very first time sit down and have an online mediation, there might be some people who will now say something like, I'm from a different generation and I prefer to just meet in person. And of course, they then insist on that. What could be reasons how to convince someone when someone is listening to this podcast now and says it is way more efficient to do it the way Jane now suggests to do it online. But my director, my executive says, no, we get on the plane, we get on the train and we travel there and all the expenses, of course, we have then and the time spent. How can I convince someone who is not very open to the online world to do online mediation?
One of the things I do, Niels, with my clients is a lot of preparation work. So you can keep that option for a face-to-face meeting open, but you can start the preparation, you can start the dialogue. With online meetings, very often for me, that's actually speaking to one of the parties or the other directly. So I can start that process online. And then if one party still wants to meet face to face and the other will agree, then we can go ahead with that. But, just getting into the process and beginning to see that actually it does work and, that people can express themselves online. It certainly requires a lot of skill from the mediator, and for people to fully engage, but it's kind of try it and see.
When people now think we might be interested in mediation instead of going for a lawsuit, the question, of course, is how do I properly prepare for one of these mediation sessions? So when you come in and you could now give people tips how to properly and professionally prepare for a mediation, what would be your top tips?
So I have a mantra there, Niels, which is prepare for dialogue and not for war. Many people who come to mediation, they're still preparing for litigation, and I don't want them to prepare for litigation. I want them to prepare for a dialogue, and I want them to think about, what is this conflict really about? Where do we need to get to? What outcome are we trying to reach? Particularly who needs to be involved in the meeting. One of the key things I like people to think about is what are the business costs of this conflict, not the legal costs. We do go through the legal costs, but I want you to have analysed both parties what the cost of not resolving this as early as possible is. Look at, how much is it costing us in productivity and lost opportunity costs? How much is it costing us in damaged relationships? And how much might it be costing us in health or employment costs? So, those things need to be thought through from the individual's basis and from the business basis as well, to sort of work out. It's what we're doing really is a risk cost analysis.
Can we bring it down to one phrase? When we keep on going with a conflict, and we all know sometimes people can be quite stubborn because they want to be right and they want to get there right. And that's, of course, when both sides start to get into mediation with that attitude, you probably won't get anywhere. So do you think that the shorter the conflict, the better the solution? Is that maybe a phrase where you would agree on?
Yeah, so I talk about early dispute resolution, EDR, and I've got 3 C's for that: cost control and cycle time. You reduce the cost, you retain more control over the outcome, and you reduce the cycle time. Many conflicts or disputes end up going on for 3 to 5 years, sometimes in organizations. So if you can that to 6 months, you've saved a huge amount on that cost control cycle time.
I think these are the perfect final words for this podcast. We see that the world of conflict continues to be in the online world. And of course, mediation is an excellent alternative to spending thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of pounds, euros, dollars, or whichever currency you're working in on either lawyers or anyone else who tries to help you to maybe not ever to get to the right point, and you still have to settle somewhere. So consider mediation. And the only thing I have left to say at the end of this podcast is, Jane, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Niels.